Welcome to the New Mexico Suncast. I'm with Commander KyleHartsock. He's with the CID unit of APD, Albuquerque Police Department, and Shelley Repp. She is the Executive Director of the New Mexico Dream Center. We're going to be talking about crime. We're going to be talking about human trafficking. Not a warm, fuzzy feeling today that we're going to get, but I'm excited because I know that both of you are doing some incredible things. Shelley from the nonprofit side, interfacing with law enforcement. So Kyle, let's get our audience to know a little bit about you first. I mean, there's a path to becoming a commander in APD. Tell us about that.
Well, I became a cop mostly because I used to watch Cops and Law and Order a ton as a kid.
That's so funny.
And it was going to take longer to go to law school and be more expensive. And at the time, a buddy of mine, we were both 19 or 20, was dating a police officer's sister and said, hey, come train with me and let's go test together because it's like a physical fitness and a written test to start off. So I said, hey, that sounds fun. Like I've watched Cops. And so I did the test with the Sheriff's Department here in Bernalillo County and then just started looking into it more. I passed the test, did a couple of ride-alongs and just got hooked. And I joined the Sheriff's Department because I'm from the South Valley here in Albuquerque. So that was my police department. I didn't grow up in an APD area. I grew up in a Sheriff's Department area. And so it felt more like home. And then when I went into patrol, I was patrolling the same area that I went to high school in, middle school, elementary. I could have lunch at my childhood home with my mom. All that stuff kind of factored in. It's different only because a lot of cops have law enforcement in their family, and I just did not. My dad was a truck driver and a furniture salesman and a newspaper man in Gallup for most of his life. My mom worked for the Forest Service for her entire career, and I just thought it looked fun. But man, it has been a great career choice because I've gotten to learn so many things and really feel an impact in helping, victims and the wider community at large feel safe. And that's the big thing. I'm 21 years in. Everybody has a right to feel safe wherever they are, no matter what their income level is, no matter the color of their skin, religious background, what school they went to, what language they speak. They have a right to feel safe where they are. And I think the police department serves an obvious major role in that. But I'll say not the only role. Like they're not the only ones that can give that feeling, but we're an important one to it. So I strive to keep the victims in front and what's going to make them feel safe and let that be the guide for how we make policy or investigate a case. And that has served me well so far.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your personal path and family's involvement, but I wanted to ask Shelley, you've known Commander Hartsock for a long time.
I have for many years.
And you maybe in some ways have grown up together Shelley deals with minor domestic sex trafficking. I didn't even know there was a thing like that. And people don't know how prevalent, maybe this is a question for both of you, how prevalent is sex trafficking in Albuquerque?
I think it's more prevalent than people realize. And in fact, that was what kind of brought Commander Hartsock and I together. In fact, we just called him. He worked with another officer at BCSO, Sheriff's Deputy, who was also named Kyle. And we would just refer to them as the Kyles.
We were the Kyles.
They were the Kyles because there was KyleHartsock and Kyle Woods. And the thing that they were doing was unique. They had come up with this really unique model in looking at domestic minor sex trafficking, specifically with runaways. And so they had developed, you guys were the developers of the Ghost Unit, right?
Yes.
And so they had developed this very specific unit within BCSO, the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, to really look for these young people, but not just look for them and be like, I'm the big bad cop and come on, I'm bringing you in, but look at it through a victim's perspective, look at it through developing relationship, because relationship can be just these really powerful tools. And so what we were able to see is that these young people just absolutely then gravitated towards you and Woods. And so we started seeing some really unique things. So our beginnings really were because we were both really concerned about young people who were kind of lost out there in the world, but were in this situation where they were in exploitive relationships or exploitive situations. Now, obviously, there are others that ended up in many other dangerous kind of situations, but that was kind of where we first started to interact.
Shelley, you've been doing this for a long time as well. Kyle already mentioned 21 years, with a couple of different departments and various capacities. We're going to talk about the law and the kindness, but you just said a couple things that people don't maybe understand.
Sure.
You said you're approaching things from a victim's perspective.
Yes.
Does that mean that at some point, maybe even the public, we think people that we see walking on Central in an evening are involved as prostitution? We don't necessarily think of them as victims, but many of them are.
That's correct. And I think that's something that with law enforcement, they serve a very specific role, and their role is different than what our role is as the nonprofit. And so we have to respect that. But also we realize that as law enforcement education and training has really embraced understanding that we have a lot of people on the streets in Albuquerque that are coming from these traumatic backgrounds or living in these really traumatic situations that then could look like they are perhaps, we would say a prostitute, but they could perhaps have a controlling person in their life that we would say would be a trafficker, a pimp, somebody like that.
And we might even point out too that sometimes that's a family member
Could be
that
a
is
family
doing
member,
that. Maybe even a
100%.
dad. I mean, there's this familial trafficking and other things that you've taught me over the years, kind of scary.
It is. And so what we've seen, which is, again, something that I just really appreciate with Kyle, is that what they, were doing through BCSO and now with APD is looking at it from this other perspective and saying this person could be a victim. What can we do to help provide services and connections to services as opposed to I'm just going to take you and throw you in jail and that's it.
Yeah, and when Kyle and I, were planning what to do with human trafficking, to say that there was a guidebook for us would be a complete lie because there just wasn't, and especially in law enforcement. Back in 2014, right when we were starting the Ghost Unit, the amount of prosecutions in the past 20 years in the entire state you could count on one hand, which meant, wow, we don't have human trafficking, right? Because no one's getting arrested and taken to trial for it. Or we have it and we are just so willfully or blindly missing it, which is part of where the name Ghost Unit comes from. It was to actually symbolize the victims, that they are all around us and we just don't see them. We see right through them. We call them deviant behavior juveniles. We call them alcoholics. We call them drug addicts. We call them runaways. In reality, most of them are victims. And so the Ghost Unit name was to really symbolize their plight. The other thing I'll add too is because there was no guidebook, right? There was no cop we could talk to. There was no training, and even the kind of private sector nonprofits were still always emerging, and it wasn't really clear who's doing what. We had to learn from our victims, and our victims became our teachers. And the first case I ever had, and I won't use her name, she's an adult now, she was 15 at the time. I only found out about her case because I overheard a deputy at the copy machine. There's like a shared printer copy machine. He was telling someone in payroll about this 15-year-old girl he had just transported from Sunport to the juvenile detention center who was caught doing prostitution in Wyoming or Montana. I think it was Montana. And he's just telling a story to the payroll person just because it was interesting, not necessarily like, let's open up an investigation.
Right.
So I had to catch him and say, hey, who are you talking about? And she shared it with me, gave me her name. And I reached out to the D home. And eventually when I got the comfort of her attorney and then her parents, guardians, I should say, that I want to talk to her as a victim, not as a suspect, because here she is locked up. I ended up meeting with her 6 or 7 times at the D home, recorded all of them, and really just went through her life and her trauma, also the trafficking. But it was multiple instances of her crying out for help in different ways to a drug addicted mom who just her priority was drugs, not her, right? to maybe schools or other adults in her life, but mostly they just labeled her as defiant or a delinquent. And even to police, where she was sexually assaulted on the state fairgrounds. And the first cops that got there were more interested in like, well, why were you even out here, this late? What are you doing? As opposed to, let's go look for the suspect. State police took over that case. And when I looked into it, they had not even investigated it at all. She went and got a rape kit done. They never tested it, nothing. She ends up telling me she saw the truck. And long story short, we end up getting an arrest on that case as well as her traffickers. But it was eye-opening to hear her experience as this kid having to raise herself. Even when she cried out for help, a lot of adults weren't giving her any credibility and labeling her as something else. Even when she did the right thing, right? She was calling police. She was making statements. She was getting these nurse examinations done, and no one wanted to listen to her. So then she gets trafficked. Well, why wouldn't you, right? What are your other options here? So she is, I'll forever remember, because she was really my biggest teacher in what we have to look for and how we find our victims. And she was part of the, to say runaway means that somebody reported her missing. She was never reported missing. She doesn't have a guardian in her life. So basically they call those throwaways. But she was not living in a stable caretaker type environment for several months at the point that she's arrested up in Montana trafficking. But you could run her name in every database you wanted to, and she would not come up as a runaway child.
So Kyle, as you see these young people in these situations, you also have a family. So overall, how does your family serve as you serve in the Albuquerque Police Department? Because that can't be easy.
No, it can't. But I mean, what better motivation and inspiration to have than my family, and especially my kids. And I forget the exact quote that's out there, but at this point in my life, I'm living for their memories, right? That's the biggest influence I have on my kids right now, is the stories of how Dad interacted with them and Dad treated them and what did Dad do for work and just stuff like that. That's my main drive. And so a lot of the decisions I make, it's like, how would my kid describe this in 20 years, right? How would they describe it tomorrow?
I heard you describe that you made some arrests as a result of this first experience.
Yes.
And you've learned a lot. But I think I was expecting something different.
Mm-hmm.
You're really emphasizing the humanity of the person you're trying to help,
mm-hmm.
and the people that can't just call them prostitutes because they may have some totally different circumstance.
Right.
Shelley, how many kids do you see, for example, when let's say adolescents, so under 18 years old, are there a lot of adolescents on the streets of Albuquerque?
So there are a lot. In looking at it, the Bernalillo County did a count. So they worked with an organization. They created something called the PIRE report back, I think that was 2021. Do you remember? Yep. So I think that was 2021. And so the people within that research liaised with different youth serving agencies, trying to do a count, how many homeless or unhoused youth are there out there on the street. And they were able to come up with I think it was 1,264 kids, I think is what they came up with that count. And if you read that report, they absolutely acknowledge that this number is low. They assume it's going to be at least double what that is. Now, these are unaccompanied young people who are on the street. We know that can be kind of fluid. It might be that they're housed for a while, they're couch surfing, they're kind of doing different things. But we're looking at, perhaps 2,500 young people within a year, I would say, plus on the streets in Albuquerque. And one of the things I just really want to point out, this is really, really important, that Kyle said, was that that this person, the terminology you would say would be a throwaway, because they were not reported as missing, whereas a runaway is somebody who is reported as missing. So when we're looking at this concept of young people who are on the street, many of them are not reported missing. They are out there because their family has just, kind of fallen apart, or their families grateful they're out there, or their families on the street as well. There's a variety of reasons why that could happen. But what that means is that they're not being tracked by anybody. Nobody's looking for them. And so that means that they're even more vulnerable because it's so easy for somebody who is manipulative, somebody who has, ill intent to liaise with these young people, and then will never even know that they were gone. So I want to say that. Just the other thing I want to jump on, just because he's had some really good things to say, and I've been holding my tongue with some stuff. When you asked Kyle about his family and about what role do they play, and what do you do, or what do you think about, I just want to point out a couple of things. As somebody who's been working with young people who have been trafficked, is that when Kyle's talking about working for his kids' memories, those types of things, which is fantastic. What he's doing is he is being absolutely that first line of defense to keep a kid from becoming a vulnerable kid that is out there on the street. So having, that dad in the house, having that, parent, and I know his wife is actually very active as well. It's not, they do, let me just tell you, if you follow them on Facebook, there's the Hartsock adventures are many, because how many kids do you have, Kyle?
There's 10.
10. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about adventures, there's adventures. But what Kyle does is he makes choices in his life and in his relationship with his kids to have that good relationship, because that is a protective factor as well. And not just because he's trying to be protective, but because he's a good dad. So he is involved in his kids' sports teams. Like I tried to get him to come with me this weekend because I'm speaking at a conference up in Grants, and he's like, got to coach my kids. Baseball tournament, which is absolutely the right answer. You know what I mean? As much as I'd like to hang out with Kyle and Grants, I don't know if he wants to hang out with me.
But let me ask you, there's two questions I want to ask. First one is this problem so massive that we can't solve it? And then the second part is, why did you stay in New Mexico? Because there's a lot of, at least some of us think the pastures are greener on the other side, right? Maybe that's not true.
So I don't think there's any problem that we can't solve. We're living in the most developed country in the world at this point in history. And, my department in the city of Albuquerque have so many resources and initiatives. It's more of a question, can we apply them the right way in the most effective and kind of efficient manner? That is always the hard part of government. That's why it's easy to attack government, but then you go sit in that seat and you're like, it's trickier than it looks. The one thing I'll say too is that number is that is the absolute lowest number. And
again, remind our viewers, that's over 1,000 kids at any given time. Tonight, there's 1,000 kids or more on the streets of Albuquerque.
And when you see that number, you might visualize 1,000 kids laying on a sidewalk, and that's not necessarily what it means, but that actually doesn't matter. What you find is neglect is our biggest indicator of future either victimization or predatory actions by a young adult than physical abuse or sexual abuse. Physical abuse and sexual abuse are, of course, terrible on a child, but they actually make up a small percentage of our victims. Like it's there, but most are just neglected, right? And so it's a caretaker who might have a drug addiction, alcohol problem, mental illness going on. And hey, the kid's indoors, right? The 4-year-old, the 8-year-old, the heat's on. There's a blanket in the crib or there's a TV on, and like that's kind of it. And that's neglectful, right? If that's the only attention and affection and love the child's getting, their brain is now developing, and that's the model, right? And children, especially before age 4 or 5, and especially as young teenagers too, these are these two proven scientifically points of life that someone is the most likely to shape their personality is their first few years of life and when they hit puberty, basically, right? All those hormones come in. That's why I used to like country as a kid. Yeah. And then I turned 13, 14, and then I've liked rock ever since, right? But we have to really focus on those times, and they got to feel love and nurtured. They have to feel that bond and a connection with more than one person's great, but a few would be even better, right? Someone who really cares and makes that person feel loved is really important. And that's missing in so many families. And so when we talk about kids on the street, this number, sure, like they're surviving, But man, you're talking about like the most basic of survival things. They need more than that. We all strive for a connection to something. We want to feel credible. We want to feel important to someone or some institution in our life. Woods and I, in what we do at APD now too, every time we find a runaway, we develop the best first question, right? Like we find them, like we found them. And we'd say, Jim, hey, I'm Detective so-and-so. Hey, where do you want to live? And it was this really empowering question that they've never really gotten asked because they've just been a kid who keeps getting like shuffled around. And they would be kind of, well, where do I want to live? Where do you want to live? You keep running away. Like, that's not working, right? Where do you want to live? I remember one, she's like, well, boyfriend's house, right? The terrible boyfriend's house. I was like, well, who's your boyfriend? You're going to have to tell me his name. Who does he live with? Lives with his mom. Does mom work? Mom does work. I was like, cool, I'm going to go talk to his mom. Are you cool with that? I am. Went ahead and talked to that mom, and she was doing well enough for herself. Their apartment was nice and clean. She loves this girl. She loves her son's girlfriend, cares about her. I talked to her parents. They're like, well, if it keeps her out of trouble, she can stay wherever she wants, and we know where she is. They agreed to give limited custodial rights to the boyfriend's mom. And I was like, you got to get her to school. You got to take her to dental appointments. She was all on board with it. And now we just got credibility with her, right? She now feels hopefully a little bit more of a connection that like, hey, this government entity thing or this police department, they actually want maybe what's best for me, and that I have some agency in saying what I want to do. When we all feel at our jobs or in our families or relationships that we have a little bit of control, we actually make good decisions, right? If we allow them to do it. And then we found those runaways we make those connections with, then they would start telling us about their traffickers. They'd start telling us about the people that hunted them and used them. And those would turn into those criminal investigations where we're getting arrested. So it started on a victim-centered model of trust and credibility, but we had to be genuine. You can't fake it.
And I would say, just me, I've not had a whole lot of interaction with the police, gotten my share of tickets.
Me too.
Yeah, I think that's funny. I know pastors and policemen get tickets all the time.
They're always in a rush.
That's right. You got 50 things you're doing in one day. Not recommending that for anyone, by the way. You're both seeing enough positive outcomes. Maybe that's not the way to read it. The positive outcomes you've seen offset the tragic circumstances that you've also seen. And that's why you keep doing it?
Why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, so I mean, what's my purpose, right? Why did I do this job? It's not to see the bad things. It's to try to reduce how many times they're going to happen. But the expectation of that number never gets to zero, right? But that's why I think, at least the state of New Mexico has one of the best retirement programs for police officers in the entire country. Like, trust me, they do. I can retire at 20 years on. New cops have to work 25 years, but that is still markedly less than most other professions do. And that is an acknowledgement of the different trauma that police officers and firefighters too can go through. But these are not generally meant to be 50-year-long careers without significant consequences to like the psyche of a person who's involved with it for so long. But anything and everything we can do to prevent the next victim from happening is my goal. And one of those things is making arrest and publicizing the arrest. Let it be known, if you engage in this behavior, this is what you get.
Yeah. And we want, with the New Mexico Sun and our New Mexico Suncast, we want to point out the really good things that are happening. There's plenty of negative news out there. And it's not that everything you hear on this show or in our newswire is going to be positive. I don't think talking about human trafficking is positive, but it's positive from a citizen standpoint to know that here in the nonprofit side, here in law enforcement side, two people are concerned with people that are on the street. There's bad things that happen. And we should also frame, this is not on my little list of questions, but would you both say that you understand evil maybe more than the average citizen does, because the people that are trafficking, they're not going to go away without some resistance.
Some of them, but I'll tell you this, the amount of people that I would call truly through and through evil that I've interacted with 21 years, I could count on one hand.
Okay.
Most of our criminals are opportunistic, right? And they see an opportunity to commit a crime and they think there's a low chance I'm going to get identified or apprehended or held fully accountable through the entire system. I will take the risk. And they do it. And it's bad intentions. But a lot of times when you end up meeting them and talking to them and getting into their backgrounds, you're like, okay, like not justified. Yeah. I see what you did here. But then I've had some truly evil, and I'll say, I interviewed Nehemiah Garego, who murdered his entire family, including his young siblings as they slept. And the lack of emotional connection he had to that crime he committed, like his response, like there was an emptiness that I had not seen before until I talked to him. And I even saw him a few years later, was taking a tour of YDDC with the CYFD secretary at the time, Monique Jacobson, and he was there. And I hadn't seen him in a few years since he was last in a room like this, confessing to a murder. And he had grown up a little bit. And I saw that same set of eyes, that same emptiness in there. And I spoke at a sentencing hearing saying, I don't know how you fix that. That kind of case keeps you up because you're like, I don't think there's a rehabilitation system in the world, unfortunately, that can help someone who had those thoughts and then acted on those thoughts. Like, I don't think we ever actually get to a safe place with him. But I said one hand I can count people that I would put into that group with Nehemiah Garego. Most of these offenders, they have their own stories as well. Again, not here to justify it and say you did bad, so don't do that again and let them out. But there is a somewhat predictable pattern to their behavior. And when you look at their childhoods, a lot of their childhoods look just like your victims' childhoods. They look like identical, right? They just took a slightly different path at the end. And you still got to deal with them, but there's still humanity in a lot of them as well.
Shelley, tell us about the New Mexico Dream Center, what you do and how you interface with Kyle.
So at the New Mexico Dream Center, we provide aftercare for identified survivors of human trafficking. And so when we've worked with APD and other law enforcement bodies, what that really looks like is us coming on after somebody has kind of been identified by them. So we don't do investigations, we don't kick down doors, we pass on tips because we'll get a fair amount of tips for different situations. But then our role is to then come and help that person with whatever their next steps are. And so it can be something like an emergency shelter for a couple of nights. It could be transportation because perhaps they don't live here in Albuquerque. They ended up here and they need, to get back to wherever they're from. And then we also do have then long-term care as well. So all the things that we do are really on the side of kind of helping that person just get their wheels underneath them again, address some of the things that kind of led to being in a trafficking situation, looking at behavioral health, mental health, and long-term stability. So that's the side that we play on that. So I don't actually work with Kyle individually. I work with his victim advocates more often than not. And that's kind of what we do. Same thing. We work with FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, BCSO. We come in on the side of saying, how can we be a victim advocate in that situation?
So I don't know if hypothetical situations appropriate here, but let's say you have a 15-year-old. So that would be a typical ninth grader, a female. A lot of people think that people on the street are not smart. Well, I'd say they might be smarter than everybody because they know how to survive. I mean, they've had some trauma, something's happened. Maybe it's in their family, maybe it's with them personally, maybe their sexual abuse, as Commander Hartsock said earlier. But let's take a 15-year-old. You develop a relationship with this person. You see them on the street. They're being trafficked as a prostitute or whatever.
So they would be considered a victim.
Okay.
So in the state of New Mexico in 2019,
Okay.
we did pass what was called safe harbor legislation, which means that within the state, you cannot arrest or charge somebody who is under 18 as a prostitute. And so that's different because somebody who is underage cannot consent to commercial sex, essentially.
Gotcha.
So that's part of even just this awareness aspect, is to kind of help change what the vernacular is. So if there is a kid who is, let's say there is that 15-year-old and they are living by, like they would say, like survival sex. And so there might not be any sort of controlling party involved, but this is just how they're surviving. So there's not like a pimp or a trafficker. They're still considered to be a human trafficking victim because of that safe harbor legislation. And so we would still be able to, provide those kinds of services.
But they're not, that 15-year-old is not necessarily, when they meet you and you help them with some bottled water the first time you meet them, maybe you give them some socks. I know you have little packets of stuff that you pass out. They might go to the harbor. The harbor's
Right.
located on Central, where it intersects with Catherine, right?
With Zuni.
Or with Zuni?
Central and Zuni.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the harbor's a place where people can come and they can get clothes, they can get food, they can rest.
Absolutely. So the harbor is a drop-in center for unhoused youth. So basically 21 years down to like 14 years old, it's walk-up basic resources. So a young person can come during those harbor hours, and it's a safe place to hang out. It's a safe place to get food. We've got lots of snacks and focus on teenager food like kid cereal, because Kyle, they love
I eat
all the
cereal
breakfast
still.
cereal. And so, but we also have a hot meal every day, and, but they can get clothes, they can take a shower, they can hang out and play video games, get hygiene. And what it is it's really based on building relationships, because when they are at the point where they're wanting to connect and kind of get help with something, whatever those next steps are, then it's at and in a way that they're ready to embrace and go forward, instead of being told, just like when Kyle was talking about, where do you want to live? Instead of being told, well, this is where you're going to live and this is what you have to do and this is how you do it. It is something that is led by them. So they're more likely to stick with those choices because they've made those choices.
So your team is not automatically saying, hey, we know this great CID commander that we'd like to
No.
introduce you to with APD.
No,
We would never do that.
Right. And I just want to say, police cannot effectively investigate and fight human trafficking without good, legitimate community organizations like the Dream Center, LifeLink, Amistad. I mean, there's a whole bunch out there. We just can't, because to build stability and to make a victim feel safe, the police just have these little bite-sized interactions with people. That's easy, relatively speaking, compared to what they have to do. And so that's the other thing that me and Kyle recognized at the time, is we have to have a place to basically bring the child to, right? To like this credible place. And it can't be a shithole. Sorry, but it can't. It needs to feel like, hey, this is a safe place for me. I'm going to succeed here, or at least I have an opportunity to succeed here. And that the people there are also trauma informed and trained. They know that they're going to have a kid who's been neglected for a long time. Your hug means nothing to them because a hug has never meant anything to them. You're going to have to teach them the value of a hug, right? That takes days and weeks and months to develop that. We have to have legitimate community organizations, not government organizations too, by the way, community organizations that we can reach out to, and they have a credible voice with these victims.
I'm thinking about citizens in the community and how they participate. First on my mind is teachers. Are they trauma informed? Is there training available for professional educators to recognize trafficking, these kind of things?
There are, and we are re-kicking off some of these programs within the city of Albuquerque that all employees have to go through. And they currently have to go through human trafficking training. And it's every city employee, from the guy that mows the lawn at the park, to cops, to firefighters, to waste management guys driving trucks around all day. But I've also personally gone out and done trainings for pediatric nurses and doctors. We trained up the entire staff at the juvenile detention center, like everyone from the cafeteria guy to the social worker, things to look for. We did CYFD workers. One of the biggest investigations we ever had back in 2016 or 2018 started with a CYFD worker who had attended the training and was dealing with a mom who's finally, they kept missing appointments. She goes, well, my daughter hasn't been home for months. She goes, well, did you report her as missing? No, because you need to report her missing right now. And then when she did, she also gave us a call and we found she was being sex trafficked in Arizona. And then one thing led to another, and eventually 8 or 9 adults get indicted federally for cross-state human trafficking. But it all kicks off with a call from the CYFD worker who had been to one of the classes and said, I feel this is what's going on. And now we're able to focus on it. So again, that kind of training and community responsibility is really, really important. And it has to function for us to effectively combat this. This is not an issue the police can solve alone. We can't even come close to doing it. There's too much noise in the area.
I'm amazed just at the perspective you brought today. I wasn't expecting, I was expecting law enforcement. Okay, here's some rules. This is what you're going to do. If you don't do these, we're going to come get you. But I really appreciate the personal touch and the passion that you're approaching this with. Talk to us about law enforcement as a career, because right now APD could use a few more officers.
Yeah, we can. And it's honestly, it's still a great career. I love it. Like I said, I can retire tomorrow and I haven't, because it is still rewarding to do. You have to have the right mindset going into it. I don't think you'll find me to be an apologist for everything that the police departments do or cops around the country, because it's not all okay. Sure. We do need to be like looking in the mirror a lot and making sure, because we are entrusted a ton to do the right thing and make the right decision. We can hold people's lives in our hands or their livelihood in our hands based on split-second decisions we make. That is a whole bunch of trust that society has empowered us to have, right? So we have to use it responsibly. And at the end of the day, what's our job? It's to make people feel safe, and it's to keep them in safe situations, right? There's everything from community caretaker and just, this looks dangerous. There's not a law being broken. I just think this is dangerous. Let's not do this thing, right? To helping people that are threatening to commit suicide, having mental health collapses, and then just straight up criminals, just straight up wrongdoing. Everything from, you cannot smoke your drugs on the sidewalk. You just can't. Like, I'm really sorry. I know you have an addiction. This just won't do, right? To murders that happen. I mean, we just arrested someone last night who just saw someone he didn't like and shot and killed her, right? And he doesn't have a criminal history. He bought that gun legally, right? But nonetheless, we need to investigate it and do the right thing. So the profession of law enforcement is great to me as long as we keep it as law enforcement. I think several years ago and decades ago, we've been asking police departments to solve all our problems. And I don't think that's actually a very good tactic. We are very good at some things, but if you try to make us good at everything, we're going to fail a whole bunch.
Well, I love the interface that you described with Shelley's organization, the New Mexico Dream Center. Shelley, you've gone a step farther. You've involved yourself personally with a number of people that have been trafficked. In fact, you adopted one of the young people that you had. How's she doing?
She's doing okay. I think she's going to probably struggle her whole life. I think in listening to what Kyle's talking about and looking at what are the systems that we need to have within our state to be able to address human trafficking and again, to be able to even get anywhere close to the other side of it, is looking at our child welfare department and what can we do to help that department be productive and be in a situation. They're in a rough situation. There's just no two ways about that. But how
I said
can we
at the
help?
beginning that we're not focused on the negative,
Right?
But CYFD, everybody's heard on the news all the
Right.
struggles. Our foster care system's in trouble, just the supervision of children. There's not very many people. Well, there's not a proportional number of people wanting to foster kids compared to the number of kids that need to be fostered. So we need to improve all of those areas.
Absolutely.
And I'm just saying that's a fact.
Right.
And so we're not here to pick on CYFD. You have some answers. So you have some ways to build a program for them.
Right. We would, in fact, we had pitched a couple years ago to CYFD under Barbara V. Hill when she was the secretary about a different way of training and recruiting foster parents, especially for teens, because that's where we really are having struggles within the foster system. It's built right now for littles. Like if you are 10 years old, 11 years old and younger, it's pretty effective. It's not perfect, just like anything, but it's pretty effective. But when you get to those preteen and those teen years and those kids that are either coming in new as a teen or have been in the system so long that they are now a teen, that there needs to be a different perspective and there needs to be a different skill set. And so I think being able to offer some of those tools within CYFD for foster parents specifically, I think that could be really helpful. We've worked with many a kid who has run away from their foster home. And not that it's this terrible home necessarily, but because, things get difficult and the way you would raise your own teen is different than how you would work with a foster teen. And so, but there's a skill set that could be passed on that I think could be effective and helpful. And I think that would keep some kids safe and some kids potentially out of, exploitive situations.
Yeah. Kyle, I'm just amazed at, well, first of all, I'm glad to know that there's a lot of organizations. It sounds like if you want help, you could get help. But the people that are victims are not really in relationships with people. The relationships they're in are for their survival. What do you find traffickers, how do they track down these kids, Kyle?
They're walking around parts of Albuquerque right this second. And they're like, oh, what are you looking for? You looking for this drug? You looking for that one? I got you for free. They're really nice. They're caring on the surface, right? They're feeding a need that the kid has right now, an immediate need. And they're giving it to them immediately.
And the drugs they're hooking them on are a lot cheaper now.
They are. And really, a lot of times the kids are already hooked on the drug. They're going to become a better free source for the drug. But eventually you're incurring a debt that you're going to have to pay back. And in one of the cases I remember, she took the drugs, she's hanging out with them. She somewhat starts a consensual relationship with one of them thinking like, this is just now my boyfriend, right? It's called boyfriending. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he says, you're going to go with this female and you guys are going to go to Amarillo, Texas, and you're going to sleep with strange men for money. And she described having somewhat of a freak out, like, no, I'm not, like, kind of panicking. And he said, well, I mean, you're already having these casual relationships right now for free. Why not get paid for it? Right? Put some logic into it, essentially. And you're going to be with someone who's going to take care of you and you're going to be safe. And they've done this before and it's a woman, right? We're going to send you with a woman to do it. So like, don't worry, it's not going to be as bad as you think. And I mean, what's her other option? Her mom doesn't even know where she is right now, could care less where she is. When she met them, she was diving in dumpsters every day to get enough scrap metal to buy meth, right? Now she gets it free. She's going to have a place to stay. Maybe this casual sex partner thing won't be as bad as it maybe sounds. Of course, it's terrible. It's terrible. She refuses to do it the first time and nearly runs out of the hotel in Texas over it. But now she's in Texas. What are her options here? The thing I'll piggyback on that though too, that I think Shelley and her groups will always have a hard time with, and we suffer it. A lot of these kids in trafficking victims, they don't use the V word. They don't call themselves victims at all. They see themselves as part of the illegal act and that they have culpability in it. So they do not just run to the first police officer they see and go, save me, sir, save me. There's the bad man. That's definitely not what happens.
They run from the police officer.
They run from us, right? Which is why, we also started a program to train patrol officers to better recognize that you are pulling over human trafficking victims in the backseat of cars all the time. they are just never going to tell you this. You have to actually recognize the signs of it. And you're going to have to dig deeper than you ever have before. Much in the same way in the 80s and 90s, cops were trained how to interdict drugs in cars. Everybody was a drug mule transporting pounds of marijuana in their gas tanks, right? And so I remember going to some of these trainings about, microscopes and interview techniques, but it was all to get drugs. We took that model and said, we need to interdict humans that are being trafficked. What questions and techniques do we need to apply to recognize I actually have a victim right in front of me right this second? That is her trafficker. And I can go the easy path and just call it a friendship, or they're in a relationship. Ours is actually trafficking right now. And I gotta dig harder to get in there and pull that information out. Even if I can't, I'm gonna get them set up with a group like Shelley's, and hopefully they are going to build that trust. And over time, that victim will come around and make that disclosure. And now we can actually move forward.
What role does the internet play in trafficking?
Go ahead.
Right now it's huge. In looking at this, there are different kind of like entry models into trafficking, as Kyle was talking earlier about traffickers who are just hanging out in areas where young people might be. What we really see is that there is, anybody can be anybody behind a screen. And so you've got vulnerable kids who are now forming relationships online, because this is how you make friends nowadays. This is how you find boyfriends. This is how you find life partners. And so that's become so common that traffickers are, as Kyle was talking earlier, criminals in general are opportunistic. This is an opportunity, and they're entrepreneurial. This is an easier way for me to kind of be behind a screen and hide myself until it's kind of an in-person type of situation. And so we see this happening through social media. We see this with, of course, like hookup apps, but we see it also with video game chats. And I think that's one of the things too, is that if you're forming friendships and relationships online as a young person, that there needs to be some caution, and parents need to be aware that there can be some dangerous people.
And this is not just a problem for lower income children on the internet. This is a problem for all kids, isn't it?
No, it is. I mean, there's manipulators of every population you can think of. Again, the difference is, I've talked to youth for years in school settings and other settings about kind of internet safety. Difference is when that kid sees that scary thing on the internet, right? Whether it's a text message, a website, a DM, do they have a trusted adult that they can take that problem to? Or do they not? And if they're not, you're asking this 12-year-old to navigate a manipulating adult's use of language or intimidation or coercion, it's hard for any 12-year-old to do, right? I mean, we ask our teachers to do it to our kids all the time because they do it to get them to do their math, right? Yes. And so the 12-year-old is now just talking to another adult. Why wouldn't they respond in somewhat of an obedient manner? As opposed to my 13-year-old texted me yesterday. He's a big baseball kid. And he got an Instagram account this year for the first time. And he screenshotted it. Goes, this guy sent me a direct message. And the guy has a profile of a former Major League Baseball pitcher, not a well-known pitcher. And I'm like, why the heck would he message you? No offense, bud. Yeah. You are my all-star. But why would he message you? And so then I'm digging into the profile. And I'm like, anything he says, screenshot it and send it. And eventually the guy's selling a product to be a better pitcher. But I also found it really strange that any adult would message my 13-year-old, even if it's trying to sell a product. I'm not messaging 13-year-olds.
Are there things done now in law enforcement? I mean, we've talked about Kyle Woods with the Ghost Unit, Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department, used to be part of that department, now CID commander with the Albuquerque Police Department. Is law enforcement able to do anything online to help protect people?
We totally do. We do a few different things. We do sting operations. We were just involved with one several months ago where we pretend to be that kid. I pretended to be that kid. I'm the dumb 13-year-old girl that you're talking to, except when you show up, it's handcuffs and booking paperwork. So those kinds of stings, we do several times a year. We publicize them. Because again, if you want to go meet a stranger online that you think's a kid, roll the dice. Right? Because if it's a cop, man, that's a life sentence, basically. Your name is going to be in a Google search forever of having shown up to meet that cop. We also aggressively investigate reports that are made by parents that come in. There's this great national organization called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They serve as like a national hotline. But if you just Google like online predator report, I guarantee it's the first thing that pulls up. But they vet all of these reports that come in and they give them to local law enforcement agencies actually all over the world so that we can go proactively investigate threats made to kids, exploitation of kids. They've been around for a while and they serve a really important function. And then we have other ways too that we are infiltrating online communities that are talking about these things.
But there's active stuff going on
all the time.
This is one of many reasons you'll discover that I'm not a police officer. I think about what happened with DUI victims, or I shouldn't say DUI victims. They're the people that get crashed into, but people that commit DUIs. And now they publish their pictures in the paper.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen more often than not people that I know very well that have been humiliated by that. And I actually think that's a good thing.
So do I.
And I would love to see that happen to the customers, the sex customers, the people that are soliciting kids out on our streets. I'd like to figure out any way I could to reduce the number of customers.
Yeah, we publish them. And I'm really proud. So we call it the high-risk victims unit that works on human trafficking with the police department. But in the last several months, we've done multiple stings. We've arrested over 50 men who are soliciting sex on really predominantly East Central by having an undercover officer out there. And every single car that stopped and made that proposition got their picture taken and it's been published by our department.
I didn't know that.
Oh no, I'm big on it. I'm like,
cool,
make him famous. It's a misdemeanor. Several of their wives had called them in missing because they didn't come home. And only to find out they were actually in jail for trying to solicit a sex worker. Because to me, it also acts as a deterrent to it. Like we will not, this behavior is not okay, especially the open air stuff like that. It hurts the businesses nearby, the schools. I mean, even talking to Woods, who I know is not here, he's had to talk to his kids about when they drive through certain parts of town, be observant, but like ask me questions.
Shelley challenged me to go down into the International District. I want to say this is Catherine in Louisiana. It's been a couple of years. There's
Louisiana and Central.
There's the one I went to.
I
went into the Kentucky Fried Chicken parking lot, and I just sat there at 11:30 at night. Oh my goodness!
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it was really scary just to see the people walking around. And I'm 6'7", 250 pounds, and I just can't imagine being a child on the street because there was not friendly people walking.
Well, it gets back to the right to feel safe, right? And I'll say this, Chief Medina has made it a priority that we have to do more on parts of Central Avenue, right? And we have to balance, of course, the rights of citizens to walk around freely with the fact that people live and work there and their kids are out there and they have a right to feel safe. And open air drug use, open air sex work advertising, things like that, we can't just ignore it forever. And at the same time, and I think we talked about earlier, this isn't a full police problem. There needs to be better drug intake systems that have available beds right now for the people that are ready to fight their addiction, right? There needs to be 10 more dream centers, to be frank with you, so that I have a place to take a high-risk juvenile right now. And by the way, they all shouldn't be on East Central. And Shelley knows this. Mm-hmm. Most of them need to be out of Albuquerque, by the way, because it's too enticing for them to just walk out the door and be right back in that life. CYFD, and I am not a hater of CYFD because they are incredibly functionally important for the kids of the state. But that foster system she talked about, I couldn't agree more. There's nowhere for teenagers to go. They end up at shelters all the time, and that shelter life can be real hard. It's an orphanage.
Yes.
America got rid of orphanages decades ago because we finally realized it's not enough just to keep a baby in a crib 23 hours a day and feed them and change their diaper. They need more.
We love you.
Why do we think the teenagers don't? At the same time, am I going to bring a high-risk recovering heroin addict 15-year-old into my house? Doesn't sound enticing. but there's got to be a different solution in there because they need a place to go. And until we do that, and these aren't police problems, those should not be police problems. We need either private groups or government-assisted groups or the government to help figure out those situations. Everyone needs a home to go to feel safe in. If their parent can't provide it for them, it does need to be the community's responsibility one way or another, because we're going to pay for that person their whole life one way or another. Are we paying for their prison? Are we paying for their funeral? Are we paying for their prosecution and criminal investigation? Or is it actually easier just to give them some stable living environment when they're 14, 15, 16? That's the cheaper option right there. I'm telling you it is.
Well, I have two last questions. The first one is nmdreamcenter.org
Yes.
is Shelley's nonprofit organization. And when I say to you, how can citizens help you do what you do? Kyle's already said he wished your organization was either 10 times as big as there was 10 more like you in various parts of the state, and even maybe some here. Tell us how people can interface with you, because I think our audience is interested. They watch the channel because they're interested in public policy. They want to know what our state's doing. They want to know what law enforcement's doing to make us safe. Really love that whole focus Kyle's had today. How can they help you?
So when Kyle was saying we need 10 more, so that comes to dollars. So you can always make donations. We are a nonprofit, so that is a tax deduction that you can take. And so donations are always helpful. But we also need people who can help with different things. We collaborate a lot within the community. So you might have a business or an organization that would be a good collaborative partner in some way. And that could be something like helping with some legal assistance with a young person, or perhaps you're a landlord with a really great property that we might be able to use for transitional housing. So looking at some of these kind of different collaboration ways. We always need good snacks for our pantry there at the harbor. So breakfast cereal, pop-top foods, easy things that young people like to eat, getting involved in helping provide meals. Those are all different ways that people can get involved in a pretty easy way at New Mexico Dream Center.
Here's the last question. It's really for both of you. How can our lawmakers in Santa Fe, we have the legislative session going for another couple of weeks, not that they could address it this session.
Sure.
But what other laws do you need in place to really be effective in preventing trafficking?
Well,
that's complicated.
Yeah. I mean, the easy answer, right, is the criminal statute for it is the equivalent of burglarizing a car in
Very
terms
weak.
of punishment.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, you said it's a misdemeanor for someone to solicit sex on Central. That doesn't seem in.
So what message are we sending if you break into a car at UNM is the same as trafficking a person to profit? So I think that sends a really confused message for law enforcement to prioritize it. And for if you're an offender, you're like, oh, I'll roll the dice right there. Two, and this one's working its way through, I think right now, I don't know where it's at. New Mexico is the only state in the country who's going to require a sex trafficking victim, a 14-year-old sex trafficking victim, to be subjected to a pretrial interview before trial. We're the only state. No one else does this. The feds don't, and 49 other states have recognized it's really traumatic. It's very scary. They've already told police a story or a forensic interviewer. To sit across from a adversarial defense attorney in a private situation scares a ton of victims from cooperating.
Yes.
That's why we push most of our cases federal, because they won't have to do it in the federal system. If you go to trial, they will, but now the defendant has to roll the dice. If I go all the way to trial, this prosecutor's probably not going to give me a plea deal anymore. So I'll say this bill's already been introduced. We should not make child victims of any crime, but especially sexual in nature ones, be subjected to pre-trial interviews. I don't know why we do this. We're just giving one more opportunity for this person to get off, and it makes no sense. But in reality, we need to continue to make sure our systems are in place to identify neglected and abused kids and put them in places that make them safe. And when I say kids, I mean the 17-year-old too.
Yes.
I don't just mean the 9-year-olds. Everyone will take an adorable 2-year-old. Everyone takes that kid. There's no problem. And I'm happy that kid has that home. But they all deserve to feel safe. And if we don't make them feel safe, they'll go survive. and they're going to make bad decisions. They're going to make risky choices. And we as a society are going to pay for those choices, whether we like it or not. It's imperative that we make them feel safe. And I'll say, our country has a good history of making kids feel safer over time. Right, 100 years ago, you could just kill your kid as a parent and it wasn't a crime because it was your kid. It's terrifying. We definitely can't do that anymore. So we're progressing in the right way, yes, but we got to keep progressing.
I love that.
Yeah.
Shelley, how about you? What do you think the legislature needs to do to help?
So I'm going to 100% jump on with what Kyle was saying, because I think those are super, super important things that we need to have. I think the other thing that we can look at in the legislature is there are several bills that are revolving around being able to help kids in care through CYFD. So there's some different child welfare bills that are out there to kind of help improve our system. And I think those are important things for us to look at as well. There's oversight of CYFD that they're looking at through an ombudsman bill. There's a couple of different other bills in looking at addressing some of the kind of internal struggles that CYFD is having and ways that they can provide some supports around that as well. So I would say I would add that onto the watch list with legislature.
I hope you will both accept an invitation to come back and talk to us, because I've literally written down like 6 more things I need to ask you, but I like to go read about those things before I ask you too many questions. And we didn't get to everything I had written down before because I love to listen. You already gave us a different perspective than I think most of us have about the perspective of the police, and it's a blessing to hear it. I really appreciate that. Commander Hartsock, Shelley, Repp, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.